infections. And there are a number of reasons for that. One, there's waning immunity, which is the reason why we strongly recommend that when people are eligible to get boosted, that they get boosted. That's for sure.
That was Dr. Anthony Fauci, who joined us on Squawk Box in the last hour. The United States reporting more than 100,000 cases every day right now. That is 40% higher than a month ago. And you've got bigger numbers and bigger concerns coming with what the CDC is projecting. Dr. Scott Gottlieb is former FDA commissioner and a CNBC contributor who also serves on the boards of both Pfizer and Illumina. And Scott, thanks for being here. We obviously all have a lot of questions about what's happening right now. I think the CDC guidance that they've given, the concerns that they are pointing out, and the numbers that we're seeing from them are maybe top of mind with me. Just watching this, they're now talking about 1.3 million cases that they're anticipating between now and Christmas, and then the death count rising to 15,000 a day, or a week, I should say, by January 8th. That's pretty extreme. And I don't know how to break this down. Tell me how concerned I should be about this. Tell me the cases that are out there being found right now, how many are thought to be maybe mild cases, maybe we're picking up more, and how do you translate that to the death count picking up too?
Yeah, look, I think we should be very concerned at this point, especially in parts of the country that are having a Delta wave, because it does not appear, based on what we're seeing out of the UK right now, that Omicron is crowding out Delta. It does appear that these two strains are coexisting. You see some decline in Delta infections in the UK, but that's probably a consequence of people changing their behavior and becoming more cautious. We haven't seen sort of a wholesale drop in Delta cases, even as Omicron has really skyrocketed. So in parts of the country that are having a significant Delta wave, like the Northeast, like New England right now, you have the potential that you could have Delta continuing to expand, continuing to spread, while Omicron also spreads on top of that. Now, there's evidence out of South Africa right now, and we've had evidence all along, that Omicron on the whole is causing less serious infection, causing fewer hospitalizations. But even if hospitalizations are substantially down with Omicron, on top of what we're seeing in New York, which is a rising flu epidemic right now, rising cases of Delta, and New York isn't the only part of the country in this situation, you could have a very difficult situation where healthcare systems start to get pressed very hard over the next 2 to 3 weeks. We know Omicron moves very quickly. It does look like the tri-state region is going to be one of the hardest hit regions early on. Other parts of the country will probably experience Omicron a little bit later, but this variant is going to move much more quickly through the country than Delta did. So people who are waiting to get a booster to afford themselves a measure of protection against this variant, time is running out to do that. I mean, if you live in the tri-state region, hopefully you have an appointment to get that booster shot already if you haven't gotten it. In other parts of the country, people should be seeking appointments right now. Those appointments are going to fill up. Demand is going to surge, which it already is doing. And the best way to protect yourself from this variant is a booster shot. One final point on this. You know, we see declines in morbidity in South Africa. There's clear evidence, fewer hospitalizations, fewer people seem to be succumbing to this virus, which is a good thing. But we do not know whether or not that's because the virus is largely spreading in a population that has pre-existing immunity to COVID, or it's just an innately less virulent virus. There's no reason to think that this virus is innately less virulent. We have to assume that the reason why we're seeing better outcomes on the whole is because, by and large, people who are getting infected with it have some baseline immunity, either from prior infection or from vaccination. So you have to worry about what happens when this gets into vulnerable populations that don't have that baseline immunity, either elderly people or immunocompromised people who haven't benefited from vaccines, even if they might have received them, or children who haven't been vaccinated and haven't been infected.
All right, here's my concern with it. I am now hearing about a lot of people I know who are not only vaccinated but boosted, who now have tested positive for COVID. Should we anticipate that they're going to be getting a mild form of it, that this is something more akin to a cold or a flu, or is this, again, something we just don't know? And if we don't know yet, when will we?
Yeah, I'm hearing the same thing. I mean, the number of anecdotes that I'm hearing of people who are getting infected, and I obviously live in the tri-state region, is becoming data. It's just so many cases that I'm hearing about. I think on the whole, we can expect that most people who have baseline immunity, certainly through 3 vaccinations, but even people who've been infected and vaccinated, based on what we've seen in South Africa, you can expect that they're going to, on the whole, have a milder infection. Some of them will still have more significant disease. And the problem is that the concern is that even if a very small percentage of people end up being hospitalized, having more serious infections from this, on top of a healthcare system that's already fairly pressed, small percentages of big numbers are still big numbers, and the attack rate here could be very high. One thing about South Africa that's perplexing a lot of people, and I've tweeted about this in recent days, is the cases are really collapsing in the Gauteng province, which is Johannesburg and Pretoria, the most densely populated part of South Africa, where this epidemic got in first, a province of 15 million people. It went up very fast, it went down very fast. So we're missing something about the epidemiology of this disease that we're not understanding. Either it's causing a whole lot of subclinical infection that we're not picking up, or it's only attacking a specific percentage of the population very quickly. And we don't know. We don't have good epidemiological data at this point to answer that question. But there is something we're not understanding about the way this is spreading in populations.
The CDC guidance that if you got the J&J shot, you should get boosted by one of the mRNA vaccines at this point. I mean, that's something I think a lot of people may be concerned about. Just this idea that if you're now, they're just saying don't take the J&J shot if you haven't gotten vaccinated yet. They're saying if you have gotten it, you need to get boosted with one of the mRNA shots. What happens to those shots? Where do they go? And what would you be telling and warning people at this point? I mean, I know when our schools first got vaccinated, it was all J&J because that's what was available to the teachers at that point.
Yeah, look, I think anyone who's gotten 2 J&J shots has good protection. The data shows that. Certainly anyone who got a J&J shot and subsequently got an mRNA boost, I think, has good protection. The data does show that. CDC sent a strong signal about preferring the mRNA vaccines produced by Moderna and Pfizer, the company I'm on the board of. I think it's unfortunate. I think the J&J vaccine is still a good vaccine. I think it's a vaccine that has easy handling requirements. And the net result of the CDC action is going to be to discourage use of the J&J vaccine, not just in the U.S., but globally, where it could be a very effective tool. So, I think the decision ultimately was unfortunate, quite frankly. Most people were deploying the mRNA vaccines anyway in the U.S. The J&J is still a very effective tool to have on the shelf. And we don't know how this virus is going to mutate. We could have a situation down the road where that J&J platform becomes a very attractive platform depending on what happens with this virus. So I would rather have that in my back pocket.
Doctor, I had 2 questions, and both in reaction to some of the comments that Dr. Fauci made. One of which was, he said, look, if you want to go to a holiday party inside somebody's home and everybody's vaccinated, go for it. I was pushing on the idea of in certain areas where the positivity rate, if the positivity rate, by the way, in New York was effectively 8% 3 days ago, it's likely, possibly, if it's doubling, 16% today, which means that it would be over 30% by next week. Does that change the dynamic with how you make these types of choices?
Yeah, I think it does. Look, the rate of transfer and the positivity rate will slow down as we get into higher numbers. But the bottom line is, I think that this virus is probably widely dispersed in the tri-state area right now, much more widely dispersed than what we're detecting. I think as we come into next week, we're going to see, really significant growth in the number of cases like they're seeing in UK. This is going to accelerate very quickly. So I think if you live in regions that already have Omicron in those regions and appear to be hard hit, it's better to be prudent right now. This is going to move pretty quickly through the population, given what we've seen in other countries. So this isn't going to be a 2 or 3 month affair in your region. This is probably going to be 3 weeks. This went up and down in the Gauteng province literally in less than 4 weeks. And so if this moves through New York, it's going to move very quickly. So exercising a little more caution over the next several weeks in a tri-state region, I think, is prudent, especially if you're bringing together groups of people where either they're vulnerable or they're going to go back and take care of vulnerable people, older individuals, younger kids. I would be exercising more caution right now, given the fact that this is probably likely to be a short-lived endeavor, and we just need to get through this last major wave. We thought Delta would be the last major wave. Hopefully Omicron is. We're not going to continue to have successive waves like this. At some point, this virus will burn itself out, and we will have enough baseline immunity in the population that it's just going to be less fearsome.
If you've
but
gotten...
I think
go ahead, Andrew. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, to that point, though, would you go to, people go into restaurants where you have to be, quote unquote, fully vaccinated. People go to Broadway shows where people are masked. Would you do those things right now?
Well, look, I think you're going to start to see, again, talking about the tri-state region where this seems to have gotten in first. Unfortunately, we're going to be like it was in the spring of 2020. This is going to be the first hard-hit region. There's other parts of the country that show a lot of infection. I think you're going to start to see things close down over the next 5 days. I think people are probably going to make decisions to close things early heading into the holidays. You're going to see schools start to close. Because, again, we're approaching the holidays. That was going to be a break anyway. I think people are going to start to do those things. I wouldn't be. Right now, I'd be taking some extra steps to be cautious, recognizing that this is going to be a 2 or 3 week spread through this region. And to the extent that I've been able to protect my family from COVID up until this point, another 3 weeks of this, I think we can get through it. Again, I'm triply vaccinated. My kids are vaccinated. So I think the consequences of an infection are substantially reduced. But to the extent that you can avoid getting infected with this, my preference would still be to do that.
Scott, we know that Israel has already moved on to 4th booster shots, and anytime somebody starts bringing it up, you get the conspiracy guys who go out there who say, oh, yeah, this is boosters for forever. But if you've been boosted, how long should you feel comfortable in terms of the immunity that it provides you? Are you talking 6 months? Are you talking longer? Are you talking less?
Yeah, look, we don't have good long-term data on how durable the immunity is from the boosters. I think you could certainly feel confident going out 6 months. For most people who got boosted, they're going to be in good shape for an extended period of time. I do think that for the foreseeable future, this probably ends up being an annual vaccine. And we've said that all along. I think people probably will end up getting another shot going into the winter next season. This will become more of a seasonal pattern to this virus. For people who are immunocompromised, and that's what Israel is focusing on right now, people who we know aren't going to get a good response from the vaccine, while we're still in the pandemic phase of this virus, I know that there are some clinicians who are providing boosters every 6 months, people who are severely immunocompromised because of pre-existing diseases, older individuals who are unwell, who probably would have a bad outcome if they got COVID. There are circumstances where we know certain patients are not going to mount a good response from these vaccines, where physicians are using discretion to boost them every 6 months right now. And that's what Israel's looking at. It's just in the immunocompromised population, looking at extending that 4th dose. I've long said, I think, for those individuals, we should also be using the monoclonal antibodies as a prophylaxis and making much more aggressive use of those drugs, basically giving someone an intact immune system in a bottle, because we know certain individuals just aren't going to respond well to a vaccine. They're not going to mount an effective immune response.
Andrew asked Dr. Fauci this, but right now, a person is still considered fully vaccinated with 1 J&J shot, with 2 mRNA shots. How long will that definition of fully vaccinated continue?
Yeah, I think you're going to see private businesses start to change the definition of what it means to be vaccinated within the context of those businesses. You'll probably see some localities do it. I think states are going to have a hard time doing it so long as the booster is under an emergency use authorization, and it's unclear when FDA is going to give full approval to the booster, probably sometime soon. But I think the federal government's going to probably be last to go on that, because my conversations with them, they've tied a lot of decisions to the definition of what it means to be fully vaccinated. And changing that definition is a difficult endeavor, at least from their perception. So I think that they're going to be reluctant to do that. I wouldn't expect them to do that, certainly until the booster's fully licensed, but maybe until next fall. I think a lot of local governments are going to do it well before the federal government, and a lot of private businesses are going to be doing that. The colleges are already doing it.
And Scott, I wanted to get your reaction to Dr. Fauci's reaction to something you had said. I'd asked him about the concerns that you've had on our program about the implications of mandates and whether they become counterproductive, not just to getting more people vaccinated currently, but to the sort of psychology of the country around vaccines broadly in the future, and whether it reduces people's willingness to accept them. He doesn't agree with that premise, and I'm curious if you've either rethought that or, what your view was of his answer.
No, I haven't rethought it. I'm pretty confident that there's going to be some corrosive effects from the episode we've gone through with trying to mandate this at a federal level. Whatever damage is done socially in terms of the divisions that have been created, and whatever benefits were going to be gained by trying to deploy those mandates have already accrued. I don't think that we're going to get much more benefit out of the effort. Businesses went forward with their own mandates, piggybacking on the federal effort. And we've seen the political divisions get drawn. I think that that's going to persist for a period of time now. And you're going to see some people in the political class campaigning around the idea of vaccines being forced on consumers, so-called forced on consumers, which isn't, I don't think, what happened. But that's the perception among a certain cohort of the electorate. So I think it's past us.
Have you seen any change in Dr. Fauci? He was kind of dismissive about it. And it was right after he said, yeah, a lot of the cases are in vaccinated people. And then he said, well, until we get everyone vaccinated. A lot of it was incongruous and just sort of dogmatic and my way or the highway. Has he changed in your view over the years, Scott? He's very dismissive of your viewpoint.
No, look,
I don't know where Scott got that. It was weird.
Look, I have a nice relationship with Tony. I have great respect for him and still have a dialogue with him. Yeah, he's a great scientist. I think that, being put into these positions where he's forced to answer political questions is, quite frankly, outside of where he's operated for his whole career.
How many genes are in it? I asked him, he had no idea how many genes were in the COVID genome. I think it's like under 30, is it not? He knew base pairs, but I was just trying to get at an answer of which gene could we possibly use that's conserved for a universal vaccine or a universal therapeutic? Got nowhere.
Yeah. There are epitopes. So, look, the problem with the virus is that the immune-dominant epitope is the spike protein. So the portion of the virus's surface that we recognize the best through our immune system is that spike protein. There are other proteins on that surface that we target, like the nucleocapsid protein, but they're not as immune-dominant as the spike protein. It is possible you can come up with a complement of epitopes that you could develop an effective vaccine that doesn't necessarily rely on a spike protein, but it's difficult. It's a difficult feat.
I gave up trying to get
If it was easy,
can you develop a vaccine against one? Can you develop a vaccine against one of the core proteins that allow the virus to do what it does, or is that in the capsid so you can't get at it with a vaccine? You know what I'm saying? Can the immune system not get at the protease, for example, or do you have to use a surface protein to make a vaccine?
I think you'd have to use a small molecule. I mean, this is sort of outside my expertise, but I think to target the virus with antibodies, it needs to be something recognizable. I will say, look, Tony's been talking about a universal flu vaccine that we wouldn't have to reformulate every year for his entire career, probably 30 years, and has been working on it, and we don't have it. And the reason we don't have it is because it's not so easy to find conserved regions on these viruses that don't undergo some mutation that you could target with the vaccines. Now, look, Vir Biotechnology did it with their antibody. But being able to do it through a vaccine where you induce the body to create the antibodies, to create the immunity, is a different feat. I'm not saying it can't be done. I think it's possible that we will do it, but it's going to take a lot more work than what we are capable of doing right now. I mean, this is some future technology.
All right, thank you, Dr. Gottlieb. Appreciate it. As we head to break, check out the FANG names this morning as we continue to watch tech stocks come under pressure. Stay tuned. You're watching Squawk Box on CNBC.
Time now for today's Aflac trivia question. In what year did the National Christmas Tree Association become the official presenter of the White House Christmas tree? The answer when CNBC Squawk Box continues.
Don't be shy now. I like that prime cut. I love my gold jacket, but that Aflac blue feels so right.
When you feel right, you coach right.
I know that's right. Prime never believed in double coverage, but health insurance in Aflac is money.
Must be the money.
And I know how Coach Prime feels about money.
Aflac.
Now that is what this jacket needs.
Must be the money.
Get help with expenses health insurance doesn't cover at Aflac.com.
As an independent financial advisor, I stand by these promises.
I promise to be a careful steward of the things that matter to you most.
I promise to bring you advice that fits your values.
I promise our relationship will be one of trust and transparency.
As a fiduciary, I promise to put your interests first, always.
Charles Schwab is proud to support the independent financial advisors who are passionately dedicated to helping people achieve their financial goals. Visit findyourindependentadvisor.com.
Find the best golf gifts at Dick's Sporting Goods at Golf Galaxy. Give the latest balls from Callaway, Titleist, TaylorMade, and more. Callaway Epic Max drivers or TaylorMade Sim 2 Max. Great looks from FootJoy, Nike, Walter Hagen, and Lady Hagen.